kickstart this session, panel 3B, data and youth demographic imperative. I think this session this afternoon promises to be an interesting one. I think we have some very good speakers, some very experienced speakers, so I think we'll share some good information about data. I think much of what we will say over the duration of this conference is going to come back to a few things. One of them, I think, will be the extent to which the Caribbean is looking at data or evidence-based policy making. And I think this is going to be an absolutely critical next step for the region, how the region is able to develop its data. So for the next 1 hour or so, I hope we'll have a bit more time. We want to have our 3 presenters and a good conversation with you. And I'm going to invite you to share your experiences in this meeting about how we can do it. I think the recommendations that we want to come from this session should be very good. I want to capture this. I want to make sure that we capture at least 3 good recommendations from this session that we can then have the whole conference take a look at, and SALISES in particular take forward in terms of research and data. So without any further ado, I want to present our first speaker, our first panelist. His name is Godfrey St. He's a senior research fellow at SALISES, and someone who I know is deeply interested in the data for this region, and has been working for a long time in making sure that the region is keeping up pace with other regions of the world in terms of its data. So I want to put your hands together and let us welcome Godfrey as he presents on the historical population, projected population dynamics in the Caribbean, a very interesting issue that we have to consider. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Layne, for the introduction, and pleasant good afternoon to the audience. I'm here now to speak about historical and projected population dynamics of Caribbean youth populations, implications for youth policy agendas. And okay, and basically I want to start by stating why I am doing this paper. It really looks at 100 years of data for the Caribbean, starting in 1950, but going beyond 2015 as far as 2050. And anything beyond 2015 is going to be reflective of projected population sizes and projected population dynamics for the countries that I'm going to look at. And I say this because we are here right now because in many ways we are responding to things that are happening now or things that have already happened. They have happened and we can't do anything about them. But what I think is more important, and I think it is a fallacy as far as all our development paradigms are concerned, is that we respond to things that have happened already. And we don't try to prevent things from happening insofar as we have some vision of the future. And we do have data that provides some pretty reliable and robust trends in terms of what is likely to happen in the future. And therefore we should start using those kinds of insights to make decisions. So basically I'm saying that we ought to be proactive when we think about the decisions we make, and this is why I'm talking about this and doing this paper. Now, what you see on the screen reflects the trends in population sizes for 6 Caribbean populations. And again, I have developed this habit of using colors consistent with the flags of the respective countries. So the green is Jamaica, the red is Trinidad and Tobago, the yellow is Guyana, although I can use red and green for Guyana, but red and green have already gone, so I'm using yellow for Guyana. The blue that you see there is for Barbados, the lighter blue is for St. Lucia, and the dark blue is for Belize. So we have these 6 countries, and you can see the differences in the respective population sizes and get a sense as to what is actually happening. Because if we look at where we are here, this is 2015 right here, and you could see the pace at which well, I shouldn't say you could see the pace at which the different countries have grown, because you're talking about different sizes, and because of the different sizes, using those slopes would be sort of misleading to tell you about the pace of growth in the respective countries. But you can see that Jamaica started at about 1.5 million in 1950 and is up to about 2.7, 2.8 million. Trinidad and Tobago was somewhere about 600 and something thousand in 1950 and is up to about 1.3 million today. Guyana is about 800,000, was about 400,000 in 1950. It's now about 750,000. And you can see Belize and St. Lucia were at the same point, somewhere about 50,000 back in, I think, in 1950, and they have grown at different speeds. So you can see what is happening with respect to the 2 populations. So having done that, I think the next slide really points to what's going on with the different age groups in terms of how growth is manifesting itself. And you can see that for Barbados, Jamaica, St. Lucia, the under 1 population is declining, and that in and of itself is already reflecting that fertility rates are declining, fertility is declining, and if fertility is declining, it will have its impact on our future youthful populations and so on. You can also see what's happening to the 0 to 4, ditto, and also the 5 to 14. I mean, the 5 to 14 grew up until about 1970, 1965, 1980, thereabouts, but then since then it has been declining. And the 15 to 24, which is the population we are concerned with, you could see what's happening in terms of the relative sizes of those populations. They are more or less getting smaller in the case of Barbados and marginally so in St. Lucia, more or less static in Jamaica. And this is up to about 2015. And we can see growth taking place in the older population groups. So I think, those are some important insights in terms of the period between 1950 and the present time. You can see similar pictures for Guyana, Belize, and Trinidad and Tobago. Although in Guyana and Belize, what you will see is that the relative sizes of the under 1 and the 0 to 4 are substantially higher than what we saw for some of the other countries, and indicative of higher fertility in Guyana and in Belize, which would somehow sustain population growth in those places. So in terms of the methodology and the data, I'm analyzing secondary data that is really obtained from the World Population Prospects 2015, so it's recent stuff, United Nations. I tried looking at other data that I had from the countries, but by and large there were some inconsistencies. I abandoned that idea. But generally speaking, I found the World Population Prospects for 2015 and the figures that indicated population sizes at the beginning of each of the decades, more or less consistent with census population counts for the respective countries, and the census population counts are usually done at the beginning of the decade. So I know that there's some level of consistency between census population counts and the world population prospects, because with the world population prospects I can actually obtain data that are comparable across the countries. And not only that, I think, with the UN data, what they do, they collect data from the different national statistical offices, and the UN has its experts who understand demographic principles and know exactly what to do in terms of, generating the requisite data. Now, these are some of the census population figures for the respective countries. And what you see here is a map more or less, showing the different countries and what is happening with respect to fertility. Of course, in Barbados began the fertility decline much earlier than most of the other countries, but Trinidad and Tobago began later and sort of caught up with Barbados. So Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados have among the lowest fertility in the Caribbean right now, and St. Lucia has had perhaps the most rapid fertility decline and is catching up with the rest and so on. But you see it's still sustained at relatively high levels, well above replacement level for Guyana and for Belize. And what this is really saying is that these two countries will continue to have high growth and will continue to have large numbers of youth in years to come, unlike some of the other countries, as we will see later. This is the longevity of life picture in terms of life expectancy, and you can see 3 countries are above the rest. Barbados, Jamaica, and St. Lucia have much more favorable life expectancy at birth than do Trinidad and Tobago, Belize, and Guyana down at the bottom there. In terms of under 5 mortality, I think the under 5 mortality mirrors exactly what you saw with respect to the life expectancy at birth. And this is important because what this is really saying, what's happening there? That's what. No. So I want to get in the red light. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Alright. So what is actually happening here is that we are seeing here the countries who are under 5 mortality are still quite high. Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago is a serious problem with under 5 mortality and so on, as well as Guyana. So that's an area for some kind of intervention, I would think. In terms of, the risk of dying between your 15th birthday and your 50th birthday, again, you can see some interesting patterns. It's still high in Guyana. Trinidad and Tobago was doing well, but it sort of petered out and leveled at a level that is still unacceptably high. Jamaica was doing quite well, but then it went up and it is coming back down and is more or less consistent with that of Trinidad and Tobago. Barbados is the only one that's really showing a much more favorable picture than the rest. So what this is saying is that our young people are still at risk of dying between the ages of 15 and their 50th birthday. And you can see we're talking out of every 1,000 persons who attain their 15th birthday, in most cases more than 100 of them will die before attaining 50, and that is not as favorable as we would like, because if you look at other countries, particularly developed countries, you will see much better pictures unfolding in those places. In terms of migration, you can see from this picture here that most of the countries have been losing population through migration. And that is one of the factors that is going to really put a damper on population growth in the future for several Caribbean countries. So as we approach 2015, St. Lucia just about breaks even, And Barbados and Belize are the only two countries that really have positive net migration. Of course, those of you who have studied Belize know that there's heavy in-migration into Belize from neighboring Central American countries, and Belize population is growing leaps and bounds as a result of that migration, further fueled by high fertility, relatively speaking. In the case of Barbados, Barbados has had low fertility, perhaps among the lowest in the Caribbean, but Barbados also has a high life expectancy. And what you expect when you have a high life expectancy is that on an annual basis you're going to have many more deaths because you have older people in the population and old people would eventually die. So Barbados would be losing people that way and so on. So median ages, the median age shows, again, similar pattern indicative of aging. And then what we have here now is really the trends in terms of what is likely to happen in the future. So this is 2015 year, and you see what is going to happen. So Jamaica will never attain a population size of 3 million. It's hardly likely that Jamaica will ever exceed 3 million people. Well, somewhere in the late 2020s and before 2035, Jamaica may very well see its population size starting to go right back down. Right? And similarly so for Trinidad and Tobago. And if you look at the lines now, I've changed the color scheme. The yellow lines really indicate those who are ripe. So those are the 65 plus. Right? The green lines indicate those who are green. Right? Those who are 15 to 24. And this one is those in between. Right? Between the green and the yellow and so on. So you can get a sense as to what is happening. And you can see that the older population, the older folks, their numbers are going up, while the younger people, their numbers are actually heading back down. And perhaps heading back down faster than the population decline, which means the relative numbers are even getting lower. This is the equivalent picture for Barbados, St. Lucia. And this is the equivalent picture for Guyana. Oops, I didn't label that. Guyana and Belize down below. You see what's happening to Belize. Belize is showing a very interesting picture here, right? And Belize will benefit. Belize, I think, is poised to grow if they can really capitalize and do the right things with respect to their young populations and their working age populations. Belize can take off. And I'm really thinking in a Marxist sense in terms of, some people say that population growth is bad. Marx would have said, no, population growth is good. High populations are better than having smaller populations and so on. But that can only happen if you preserve the whole notion of equity and equality across the board. If you have any form of inequity and inequality, that is a serious threat to growth as a result of high population growth. So Belize should know what it has to do. Now, I did this just to demonstrate again, what is happening to the elderly population relative to population growth. And these slopes, this is done based on a semi-logarithmic chart. So the slopes actually tell you about the pace of the growth that's taking place. And again, you can compare and see with respect to the youthful population, which ones are declining fastest. And it looks like St. Lucia, Jamaica. Barbados is sort of steady. Guyana is sort of steady. Belize is actually increasing. And Trinidad and Tobago. So Trinidad and Tobago, St. Lucia, and Jamaica are the ones that are really being threatened in a sense. So what I have here are the actual figures themselves, and this is the point where you can expect some kind of turning point. I'm having problems with this. Oops. This is where you can expect, the population to start declining, where you see the bold red, the bold shading, right? This is where you can expect the respective populations to start to decline. So what you're seeing is basically of the 6 populations, 5 of them will eventually decline in size before 2050. Belize is the only one that is going to have sustained growth. And I did 2 scenarios, a medium scenario and a low scenario. The low scenario assuming lower population growth than the medium scenario. And what you actually see is that even with the low scenario, you can expect to see, much more so, the decline will occur even faster, which has implications for what will happen to the youthful population. Now, we do these different scenarios because we do not have a sense in terms of what is going to happen with respect to population growth. So, to wrap up, I just want to talk about, make a few quick statements about the implications for these trends. It's certainly in countries like Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Lucia, Jamaica, there's need for more favorable mortality, right? More favorable mortality patterns than needed. We need to brush up in terms of, enhancing survival chances of youthful and young adults populations as they move through the various stages. I see a possible threat to youth participation, youth being overwhelmed by other populations predicated on age. Fertility is a critical issue because while fertility is declining across the board, it is not declining in all subpopulations. And some of those subpopulations that are least likely to care for children and produce the kinds of attributes, they are the ones who still have high fertility. So we may end up having smaller numbers of those with larger numbers of children that the state will have to look after. The state will have to do a good job because those children transit into becoming youth and so on and so on. Migrant populations are a possibility, right? We have to prepare our youth populations to deal with an influx of migrant populations from more populous regions. We have to ensure that our young people develop linguistic capabilities in keeping with these new groups and so on. In terms of the entrepreneurial ventures, we have to facilitate younger people in terms of building their entrepreneurial capabilities. And in doing so, we have to ensure that they are linguistically capable to do business with Francophone and Hispanic countries and so on in the region and elsewhere. And finally, we have to recognize that youth is a moving target and they need to take stock of all those cross-generational goals and how they interact with one another. And in terms of, and at the same time be cognizant of different realities and perceptions of those realities with the passage of time, albeit taking into account these population dynamics that I've alluded to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation, and those trends that we saw, we will probably have a good discussion about what does that mean for our countries. We're talking about youth here, but if you look at the youth trends there, what proportion of the total population are young people, and what does it mean if the youth population is declining while the elderly are increasing? Godfrey mentioned the need to have linguistic abilities, and now we'll be transitioning to our presenter who's from Mexico.
Nice.
So Greta is our next presenter, and she'll be sharing some very interesting work that she has done on the Youth Participation Index and on youth in public policy decision making in Mexico. She is the director of an institute that we would call a youth movement that has really created this wonderful tool. I'm going to hand you over to her now. It's called Layne, and I hope that as she presents, you will be inspired in your minds, and we'll have some discussions later. Greta, over to you. Round of applause for you.
Thanks, everyone. So as Godfrey was just saying, I hope your Spanish skills are good because my presentation is going to be in Spanish. That was a joke. Okay, so I'm here because I run an organization in Mexico. Oh wait, let me do something before because I talk a lot, so I want to make sure I...
She have a timekeeper here.
Okay, now we have to. Okay, so I run an organization in Mexico. It is a youth-led organization. We are all young people there, and our main focus is participation. And by participation, we mean a very, very broad definition of participation because most of the times when we talk about participation, we think about civic participation, that in Mexico means going to vote. But for the people that work with me in Layne, participation means much more than that. Participation means taking an active part in society, in anything that has to do with the government, the civil society, or the economic aspects of our country. So just giving you some context, Mexico has 120 million people right now, and we have around 30 to 40 million young people. So it's a very, very, very big generation. It's the biggest youth generation that Mexico has ever had and that Mexico will ever have. So it's a great moment for our country, and it's a great moment for the youth in Mexico. But we don't have very strong public policy regarding youth, or particularly regarding youth participation, and that's why we started this project that allows us to have information, but like hard information on what young people are doing in Mexico, and more importantly, how we can help these young people do whatever they're doing in a better way. So, okay, before I give you some of the results of this investigation, of this research project that we conduct, let me tell you two things. The first one is that our definition of young people is kind of ambiguous, because we have several definitions, and I know this is something we share. I have heard like 10 different definitions for young people since yesterday. So for the sake of our study, of our research project, we consider young people all those individuals who have between 15 and 29 years of age. And this is, we did this because the National Statistics Institute considers that as young age, and all the information that they produce comes in that range, and that's the main reason we did it. But interestingly enough, the youth, well, there's no national youth law in Mexico, but there's a youth institute, and they say that the age is 12, it's between 12 and 29. So that's our first problem, you know, because public policy in Mexico has to be designed. I mean, like youth policy has to be designed for an age that has no real indicators. So we decided not to go into that debate and just make it 15-29. We are measuring in this study formal participation, and that means young people who are participating within spaces, within institutions, and we have 5 different kinds of institutions that we study, which is social NGOs, civil society or NGOs, universities, political parties, the government, and private enterprises. And we, in every one of these spaces, we measure 3 different things. The first one is how many young people are involved in that space. That means how many young people work there, or are volunteering there, or are doing some kind of internship or apprenticeship or whatever. The second one is how many of these young people have access to the organization's institutional like payroll. How many of them are getting paid for what they do, because we believe that it's really important that young people have employment opportunities and that they profit economically from what they're doing. And the third one, which is the most important to us, is how many of these young people have access to decision-making processes inside the organizations. So here are some of the results that we got for our 2013 index. This is not the newest edition, but this is the one that we had in English. So I'm sorry about that. Okay, so the first space that we consider, as I told you, is NGOs. And we got like very interesting results, because we got for the first thing that we measured for the first component, we got that 8 out of every 10 participants in civil society are young. And this is a very interesting piece of information, because when you go to the official information, Mexicans think that young people don't participate, that young people just don't engage in anything, and the results of this of our research project, and they have been consistent through time, say exactly the opposite. Young people are committed, young people are working to make our country better, at least more than adults. So this is something that's really surprising for us, and that has gotten us into trouble, because the official information says exactly the opposite. The second one is that only 5 out of 10 people who receive payment in NGOs are young people. And the last one is decision making, and here we have a great area of opportunity, because only out of 10 decision makers, only 4 of them are young. So with this information, well, I'll talk about it later. Like I want to talk to you about what we do with this information. So next phase is government. We did some data recollection through something that we have, which is a law of public access to information. So we asked every ministry and every government office in Mexico the same questions: how many young people they have there, how many of them are getting paid, and how many of them are making decisions. And you'll see that the results are not really cool. So we have that 2 out of 10 people participating are young. 2 out of 10 employees, like civil servants, are young, but only 1 of every 10 decision makers is young. So this is something that, of course, the government didn't like a lot, and this is something that we really need to work on, because remember that the first thing I said is that Mexico has the biggest generation of young people in its history. So we really need to get those young people right there, and we need to make sure that they participate in decision making, because I mean it's our country, and we really need to be represented. Okay, so next one is political parties, and if you can see, this infographic has only 1 slide, not 3, and that's because political parties in Mexico are really hard to crack. We've been working with all of them. We have around, well, we had 10 political parties last year, now we have 9. Yay! We work with all of them, and every year we beg we beg for their information, and this is what we get. So in 2013 we got that only 1 out of 10 decision makers in political parties are young. This year the information that we got is that 3 out of 10 people who are participating inside a political party are. And why do we get just sneak previews from the information? The answer is really simple, because political parties themselves don't have this information, which is great. We're really scared about this panorama, because I mean, how come political parties don't know how many young people? They don't even know how many people they have. So yeah, it's interesting. But let's remember that Mexico has the biggest generation of young people ever, and in Mexico 1 in every 3 voters is young. So political parties should really be looking at this information and should be doing something, right? I mean, they are kind of doing it, and we work with them, and we're like really close to them, because we want this to change. We want more people involved in politics. Okay, next. Private enterprises. We got that 3 out of 10 people who participate in a private enterprise are young. We got that 3 out of 10 employees are young, so people who are getting paid for what they do inside the enterprise. But we also got that only 1 out of 10 decision makers in private enterprises are young. And this is also This is also preoccupying because we want, and I was in the economic panel before, we do need young entrepreneurs and we need young people who are taking decisions inside the private sector because we need money. I mean, we need development and we really need to create jobs and opportunities for young people. And the last one is universities. In universities, of course, we got a high number of youth presence. 8 out of 10 participants are young, but only 1 out of 10 employees are young. And remember, this is the information for 2013. The information for 2014 is a little bit more complete, and we have the decision making slot as well. And it's 1 out of 10 decision makers are young. And this is a very important thing because we want people who are in university, young people who are in university, be it studying or teaching there or working there as an employee. We want them to participate in decision making. We want, for example, in Mexico we have a national university, and this university has a president, right, like every university, but the students and the young people do not participate in selecting who this person is. He's appointed by the president. So that makes no sense, right? I can see from your faces that you're like, what? Well, that happens. I mean, and it's I think it's really symbolic, and it's really significant that we really need to change it. So, okay, so this is more or less what we do. We collect information and we make this kind of presentations every year, and then we use this information to create special programs and public policy recommendations in Mexico, so we get those numbers to change, because of course we want all of them to go higher. And I think that Godfrey said it just before, that having information and being able to use it for good, for the good of society is really important. And projects that aim at helping young people get developed, or involving young people in development, they need to be supported by data. They cannot come from our hearts. They really need to have information, hard information that support them, because that way we will also be able to measure the impact of this project. So with this information we have created projects that help young people to get involved in politics, that help young people to be better entrepreneurs. We have been having negotiations with legislators, with political parties, with the Ministry of Youth, with a lot of local governments, and the level of our negotiation is much better because we have data to support what we're saying. And well, I guess that's it. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, as I said, this session, unlike many of the others, is really driven by evidence. And so the discussion we want to have is, how do we therefore use this evidence that we are able to amass? First of all, are we able to get it? And when we get it, what can we do with it so that we are actually making real change? So I want to thank Greta for this presentation and for the work she does in Mexico to change the situation for young people. Well, the last presenter we have this afternoon is the youngest participant, I think, in the conference. He's 17-year-old Devon Brewster from Dominica. And he is a student leader, was a student leader, who is really thinking more about what youth participation and democracy and all these issues will mean for his country. And so I want you to help us to help me to welcome him as he comes to make his presentation on the demographic and definitional imperatives in youth in the post-2015, looking at gender balance for sustainable development in the Caribbean. Round of applause for him.
Okay, good afternoon to everybody. Just want to thank the moderator for his words of welcome. First of all, just one point of correction. Point to consider. While the topic of my research paper includes demographic imperatives for sustainable development, for the purpose of the presentation and the time allotted for the presentation, I've tweaked the topic a little bit. So we have gender balance for sustainable development of the Caribbean post-2015, where we are heading, and where we ought to be. The topic on the issue of gender imbalance is not any recent phenomenon. It has been there for a number of years. And the United Nations World Food Programme refers to gender balance as the goal of having the same number of women and men staff in different levels of organizational structure. And I would like to add to that organizational structures include the home. So the home is an organizational structure. It was Professor Errol Miller's publication, The Marginalization of Black Male, Insights from the Teaching Profession in 1986, that brought to the fore the very reality that Caribbean females were beginning to outnumber males in the academia. In analyzing data and trends, we'll recognize that education of the Caribbean has a lot to play in everything gender. So I've put together an unofficial gender timeline, right? So we're going to look at, firstly, before the 1800s, and I've categorized it into domestic, social, and educational. Domestically, we know that the men were always the breadwinners, and the boys were trained to be like their fathers. So the men would be hunting for food and so to support the family, and the boys would be trained to follow suit. So follow their uncles, follow their male cousins, and follow their fathers. While the women were marginalized to home engineers, domestic engineers. So they were the ones who took care of the children and did everything at home. In terms of society, the men were always seen as superior, while women were seen as inferior. Educationally, the males, and particularly the boys, were unconcerned with education. First of all, we have to note that in those times, education was not seen as important. It was not seen as necessary, and also access to education was very limited because that is still in slavery days. But we see that the little education that was available, and that is through the church, girls were privy to that. Right? So let's move to 1850 to 1900. We see that on a domestic level, first of all, we note that the slaves of the Caribbean would have been emancipated, so no longer slaves, but are ex-slaves. And the domination of men begins to be threatened. Right? Because now everybody is liberated, and the women are starting to step into boundaries that they never stepped on before. Socially, the society begins to be more compassionate to females and female rights. On an educational level, females continue to absorb what little education existed, and access to education improved. 1900s to 2000s, domestically, we see that home headship is gradually moving from a sole patriarch kind of thing to a mutual headship. Society, women's fight for liberty intensifies, and cries are being heard internationally. Educationally, we see something interesting. As education becomes more and more accessible, advancement in technology reveals that there is a greater need for education. And who were the ones getting the little educations that were there? The females. So we see that from the onset, the females have always been ahead of the males. Because while at that time, the females having that little bit of education, so they are more ready for the job market as technology improves, the men are now trying to catch up. And that brings us to where we are now in 2050. Where we are now on the domestic level. Single motherhood is a prominent feature of society. Single fatherhood, though seemingly relatively minimal, is being shunned as the height of CCism, if you know what I mean. Another thing is that in more cases than before, the headship of the home is becoming a mutual task. While sole patriarchal headship still exists, we see a rise in matriarchal headship of the home. And this is because of the change in the role of women. And factors affecting change in the roles of women: women are more financially independent, women are highly motivated to pursue academic pursuits and to make them very marketable for the workplace. And finally, women are increasingly becoming breadwinners of the family. Where we are now in terms of society. Society, as it is now, accepts the validity of both male and female opinions, and they recognize the rights of females as well as the rights of women. Women are becoming more active in political affairs through local and central government. Men and women both enjoy almost the same fundamental rights and freedoms. And I want you to always consider that we are speaking in the context of the Caribbean, okay? Because we know that there are extreme situations outside of the Caribbean. Male complacency has led to a number of social ills, including the rise in fatherless children and heightened crime and violence. In terms of education, where we are now, numerous collected data from researches conducted across the region suggest the reality that generally females are doing better than males academically at all levels. An annual report from the Caribbean Examination Council reveals that females generally outdo males at CSET, but males will usually outperform females in some technical subjects, just a few of them. Another thing is that there has been a rise in school dropouts, and majority of the school dropouts are male. Academic pursuits of males is being labeled as effeminate or homosexual by society. And an interesting quote that I read from the New York Times from a Jamaican teacher, Wayne Campbell, said, "It's almost as if manhood and masculinity have been hijacked by a thug culture far removed from education." So as opposed to society bringing both male and female to the point of knowledge where we understand that in this day and age we need education, society now is putting labels on young men who are pursuing academic pursuits. And so that we see as a major problem. And so it brings us to the reality that exists in UWI. At UWI, in terms of the demographics, gender, we see that there are 70% females and only 30% males. So that is a 7-to-3 ratio, and that is a problem, right? I understood that it has improved a little bit because previously it used to be 8 to 2, but now it's 7-to-3. Domestically, women are becoming more and more stimulated, educated, and ready to flood and/or are flooding the job markets. Thus, women are becoming breadwinners, and it's forecasted to be a prevalent phenomenon in the future. Family structures are forecasted to undergo a drastic change to accommodate the increase in absent fathers and mothers. And I highlighted absent because it might be for different reasons. It could be that the women, the mothers, are more on the working field, so they are working more, so less time at home. It could be that both the parents are working and less time at home, or it could be that the men are simply absent, not necessarily working. In terms of society, where we are heading, based on the data that we have now, the percentage of unengaged, uneducated, and unemployed males in society will skyrocket. Male stagnation will continue to yield social ills on a larger scale. The imperative allocation of resources to resolving issues associated with that is something that will impede on our sustainable development. If we continue in this trend, then the government will have to invest so much into curbing these social ills that it will set us back, because these resources could be allocated to something else. And that brings us to where we ought to be. Families bonded together by a mutual headship of mother and father in an atmosphere where there is comfortable rapport between all members of the household, and parents are not overconsumed by work at the expense of quality family time. This is where we ought to be heading. But unfortunately, based on what the trends that we are seeing now, it doesn't seem like this is where we are heading. And that is a big problem. Also, where we ought to be, we ought to have a society where there is a balance of men and women in all levels of government and organizational structures. A society where both boys and girls can thrive academically without being labeled in any derogatory manner that will impede on their development and that of other members of society. And that, I think, is what drove me to do such a research, right? And because from a personal experience at high school, pursuing my academics with pride, I was privy to a lot of judgment and labeling as a high school student. But as I continue to empower persons who go through similar situations like me, that you don't let that keep you down. You simply just thrive. Okay? And in terms of where we ought to be, one more point, the employment of mechanisms to stimulate both males and females in the areas of academics, such that there can be a balance in successful enrollment of males and females in all levels of education. And I highlighted successful because we don't want to say we want to change the enrollment of UE to 50-50, but only 25% of the 50% of male graduates and the other 25 drop out. We want to ensure that we have successful enrollment, 50% males, 50% females enter, and 50% graduate from each of the categories. Okay? Now this leaves a question. How do we get there? And I propose a redefinition of our approach to combating gender imbalance. And I would like us to draw attention to goal number 5 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And it reads, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. My question is, do the males need to be empowered as well? The males need the attention. Because if we look at what is happening in high school dropouts, males dominating that. Prisons, the males dominating that. Road stagnation, you see, you pass on the road, you see a lot of men just there wandering away. And so we need to move from that focus on only empowering women, but we need to empower both men and women, because what will happen is that we're going to have a society where the women are on top and the men are continually kicked down because little attention is placed on them. Because look at this. This is a UN goal. Now what I'm saying is that if we are thinking Caribbean, we don't have a situation where women are heavily oppressed. Right? I'm not saying that might not exist in other parts of the world. But a problem that we have in terms of policy making on an international scale is that they sometimes think that we must have something standard and it applies to every single society. And I find it difficult for leaders of the Caribbean, knowing our problem with males especially, to go to UN and not oppose or propose that this be amended to include the male. Because in the Caribbean we have a problem with male stagnation. Right? Look at the first 2 points under this goal. End all forms of discrimination against women and girls everywhere. But there is discrimination against males as well. The second one is eliminate all forms of violence against all women and girls in public and private spheres, including trafficking and sexual and other types of exploitation. But men are being abused as well. And this is a problem for our society, because you see, a young lady would go on the radio or to any media and speak of the abuse that of a past boyfriend or something. So the nation will weep with her. The nation will be compassionate with her. But a married man will go on the radio and speak of the abuse that he has been exposed to for 20 years. And you know what the nation will do? The nation will laugh. And that is the very reality. And if we are going to move towards sustainable development, then that must be changed. We must ensure that the men and the women have an equal voice in development. We must ensure that the men and the women receive the very same attention, because we are all privy to all forms of discrimination and all forms of abuse. Okay? And in closing, the pursuit of sustainability through sustainable development in the Caribbean requires a hands-on inclusion of all youth. And I highlight all because by all, I mean male and female. Everybody. We require everybody. And the final thing is that the youth arm of sustainable development must equally reflect the diversity in thought, concept, and foresight of both young women and as well as young men. Because we have to understand that both males think differently from females, right? Even in terms of development, we know that at a certain point in development, the females develop a little faster. And so we must be able to put mechanisms in place to accommodate the difference in males and females, so that when we are pursuing the goals of sustainable development, that we do not leave out any particular gender, that everybody is equally benefited by the sustainable development goals. Thank you very much.
Very much. Thank you so much, Devon, for that presentation. And I think it's very good that Devon could present in this conference as a young man beginning to look at some of these sociological issues. And I could only encourage him to continue to study these issues and much more as he continues to study and unpack them as a young academic in the Caribbean. We will need to see many more young people do and take that trend. So there you have it. We have had three very different presentations, but very connected presentations. And I want to invite from you now some questions and comments with a view that we could have a conversation about what does this all mean. We've heard from Godfrey about the population dynamics in the past and what the trends may mean for the future. And looking at that, some questions must come to our mind about the size of the youth population in the Caribbean and where the trend says it will go. And also the size of the aging population in the Caribbean and what that means. That's an interesting big picture to begin the discussion on. And then we heard from Greta. She then looked at participation. Very, very important issue of participation. How do we talk a lot about youth participation in this conference? What does it really mean? And Greta has tried to show us in the Mexican context what participation means for them. What does participation mean in your context? How would you measure this participation? How do you know if youth are participating more today than 5 years ago? And then finally we heard from Devon, which is now going a little further to look at the participation in respect to gender, and to say that young men are not equally participating in development. In fact, it's going against them, which is going against the trend that is public in other places. So it's a very different presentation, but connected. But what does it mean? What did it mean for you? What reactions do these presentations have for you? I now open the floor for a few questions, make them very brief, so that we can have a response from the panelists as well. Any thoughts? Just shoot up your hands. I see a hand. Go ahead. Let's make them very quick so we can have some discussions. Much tighter comments as much as we can. Go ahead,
okay, it's sort of a comment, but invoking some thought. You placed up on the screen the Barbadian situation. And this is a conversation that I started yesterday with someone, where Barbados has a growing population. We have to worry about, instead of maybe schools, we have to worry about old people's homes. We have to deal with the problem of abandoned elderly being left in the accident and emergency hospital because of homes being overwhelmed taking care of them. We have to deal with the non-communicable diseases and the kind of health care that is geared towards the elderly. And hearing some of the presentations on youth, that had me a little concerned, because there's this push, you know, for youth. Without I'm not saying that we should not look after youth. You know, that's part of my portfolio. But I still have to be conscious that there's one pie. And when it comes to allocation, what do I neglect the elderly for the youth? Do I neglect the youth for the elderly? And I heard a presentation talking about power. Power at whose expense? These are policy issues that I think that some of us need to temper our passion a little bit and face some realities. Because it is okay for you to champion government. You're not doing anything for young people. But yet you have other demographics who are demanding your attention, whose problem, if you are not able to strike the balance needed, could have some serious implications. And on the question of gender, we also, with that situation, I think I mentioned a little bit of it yesterday in another forum, where a lot of us, because of our youngsters, maybe our young males, maybe not wanting to go to university, we see them as being dropouts and so on. Then they are on a different track. And we are not listening and trying to create the road or pave the path for them to achieve what they want to achieve and maybe earn 10 times the money of the university graduate. So we tend to put everybody in a little box because of our traditional perceptions of things. So I think that in all of what we are discussing here, we always have to be mindful that we need to strike a balance. And in terms of the Mexican example, I think this poses another question. Reading from the Barbados perspective, we have a lot of females who don't want to be involved in politics as members of the House. They don't mind working in the background and pushing the men, but they don't want to be up front. And then we have a lot of young people who, when it comes to the political endeavors, they don't mind being the youth arms, doing the footwork, writing the youth manifesto, but they ain't ready to go and take on the headaches of being a minister. Although I hear that we should have a minister of youth that is a young person, but that person may not be ready and they don't want it at that particular point in time. So I think that sometimes our own feelings and how we see things may not necessarily line up with the reality of a situation, remembering that despite we are all Caribbean people, we are coming from different countries with different cultures.
Very good point. That's point one there. And I'll just take 2 or 3 more. So a very interesting point there that youth development is a national issue. I said that yesterday, and it's very interesting that that point comes through. It's a national issue, and countries must be allowed to define them. But I'll ask panelists to take note of those comments, and at the end we'll take a yes, sir, from US staff. Could you just say, probably Madam Pierce, could you say the names that we know?
Oh, Ruth Blackman, Barbados, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry responsible for youth.
All right, thank you so much. Yes, sir. Could you also do the same?
The name is Shane Book. I'm a youth ambassador to the Vice Chancellor of the University.
Yes, sir.
My comment is more Jamaican based because I can't speak on the entire Caribbean. I believe that it's more a psychological thing when it comes to gender. Because what you find is that males are comfortable when females overshadow them. Because in the home, right, you are, you're actually comfortable with it. Because in the home, you are raised in a matrifocal, right? And most of the homes in Jamaica, the mother is the head. And because of that, you listen to your mother, you're okay with your mother making all decisions. And she's a female. You're not raised with your father where you can see your father taking a dominance for you to observe him and work that way when you go out in society, right? So within the context of my country, I can say that many males, when you see them get up and they're able to rise above the occasion, coming from a home where the mother is the head, it really shows that they are ambitious and they want better for themselves. And but in terms of gender, it is really the fact that they are comfortable with the female, which is why most persons go out in society and they see the females head of organizations. They're okay with it. They don't want to rise and take the position as well. If they're in an election against a female, and they don't feel that level of confidence in themselves to battle the female, because they believe that because of where they're coming from, females have the better ideas, they are better decision makers, they are very good practical, and they are better in leadership than males, right? And it's becoming even more dominant now because you've got the Prime Minister,
So we're going to try and show you the point I want to make for this one is thank you so much for coming. But what I think this conference is going to do, we have a lot of good ideas and hypotheses that need to be tested. And I want to challenge you to go and do some empirical research to back up, confirm, or affirm what you have just said and bring that to the next conference. Very interesting idea. But what you have to do, we're trying to facilitate and stimulate ideas that need further research. I think that may be one of them that need some good research to make it valid. But thank you so much for sharing that. I take one more and I'm going to give Pilot some time to share.
Yes. Even though I just came in, I was looking at this.
Yes.
And as international relations in the Department of Government, I've been very interested in youth participation, particularly voting behavior and so on. I've looked at researches that in recent times, the trends and patterns that shows that there is a high level of youth voter apathy. And even asking around campus, what is your attitude or your thoughts on this? Young people are very skeptical. I think what are the possible ways in recent times can we re-engage them or make them more involved in the political and decision-making process?
Very good question. So one more and then we go to the panel. So we're asking, what does participation mean? And I heard that coming through in Mexico it might mean this. What does it mean in terms of voting? Let's hear our fourth comment and then we go to the panel. Yes. Say again, please. Sorry, did you say your name and did you say your name before?
No.
Please do.
Tina Renier.
Hi, Tina.
Yes.
From UWI,
Yes.
Department of Government.
Yes.
My name is Zanella Saxton. I'm from the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, and I'm the youth coordinator in Nevis. I was very intrigued by Dr. St. Bernard's presentation and the fact that he spoke a bit about low fertility and what that means for youth in the future and every other generation as we go along. And I thought, and he brought the point up towards the end of his presentation where he stated that this would mean that if you have that low fertility rate, the people who are actually reproducing, will be those who are on the lower end of the poverty scale. My question or my concern then becomes, what does that do for our social development, social services sector in terms of the economy of the countries? What would that do in terms of the dependence of the families on the countries to support them? I know he said that we have to put certain things in place to support them, but does that mean that there's going to be increased dependence? Yes. One may say we can have youth development programs when they get to the youth age, but what happens, what would need to be in place for us on that 0 to 1, 4 to 10, preteen age, where we can make sure that they're alive before we can get them into those entrepreneurship programs or whatever it means or is needed for them to be empowered. So that would then suggest to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong or give me some guidance on that clarification, but that would suggest to me that means that the government would then have to pump more funds into making sure that those children can see through to youth before we can empower them to take care of themselves going forward. And that would then mean a great strain on the economy.
So some ideas coming through. I'm going to go to the plans. Let's make them short. I want to take one more round if you could squeeze them in. Miss Mighty, could you check what's our time? Because we would have supposed to be finished now. Could you check what is the time that they're like now? So we'll know. So I'm going to go to the panel. We've heard some questions and some comments. What say you? Why don't we start off with Greta? Let's see. Probably we're going to start off and then we take.
Okay. Well, I have a couple of things that I wrote down, and I think that what Ruth has been saying is really important. And I think it combines a lot with what Godfrey said. We are very used, and this includes Mexico as well, to have reactive policy, right? Like, oh no, we have a lot of young people, oh, we need education. We needed education 20 years ago when those were children. You know, now what we need is to start thinking on what's going to happen. I mean, and in Mexico we're in big trouble because we have a very, very, very big generation of young people that by year 2050 are going to be old people with no retirement, with no nursing homes, with no health, with nothing. And right now, we're running late because we're talking about young people. We should be talking about the older. Like, I totally agree with you on that, and this is something that I usually say and that usually gets me into trouble because people are not looking at these things. So yes, we really need to be proactive about it, and we need to be planning ahead because otherwise we're just, you know, like trying to put out the fires that already started, and we're not looking at what's coming. And the second thing is, what happens with young people who don't want to participate? Well, let them not participate. I mean, there's no problem there. But at least in Mexico, there are a lot of people, of young people who want to participate, but the system does not let them. For example, in political bodies, we have some political bodies have specific regulations that allow for young people. They have like a quota system. So they say that 20% of all candidates should be, I don't know, younger than 30. But then when election times come, somehow we just forget about it, and we get old, very, very old candidates, and young people are, you know, like in the background, and they're like carrying stuff, and they're like giving away some flyers and stuff. And this is something that happens all the time. So we really, really, really need to make sure that young people who want to participate get the opportunity to participate, because, and I agree with what Ruth said, a lot of them may not be prepared, but there are some of them who are super prepared and they are super willing and able to do the job, and they don't get the job because of their age, and that is not cool. And for Tina, I think that I agree with you. Young people are normally skeptical of institutions, of participating through institutions. But what we found in our country is that a lot of young people are skeptical because they don't have access to information. They don't know what's going on inside the parties. They don't know what opportunities they might have in one or another institution. So what we did, and this is my organization's proposal, is that we created a website in which we portray all the different parties and what they're doing with respect to youth. So we had interviews, and we know that young people don't really like to read, so we created a series of videos where the party, like the young leader of every political party, talks to young people and tells them what's going on inside that party, so that young...
Very much. Thank you so much, Devon, for that presentation. And I think it's very good that Devon could present in this conference as a young man beginning to look at some of these sociological issues. And I could only encourage him to continue to study these issues and much more as he continues to study and unpack them as a young academic in the Caribbean. We will need to see many more young people do and take that trend. So there you have it. We have had 3 very different presentations, but very connected presentations. And I want to invite from you now some questions and comments with a view that we could have a conversation about what does this all mean. We've heard from Godfrey about the population dynamics in the past and what the trends may mean for the future. And looking at that, some questions must come to our mind about the size of the youth population in the Caribbean and where the trend says it will go. And also the size of the aging population in the Caribbean and what that means. And that's an interesting big picture to begin the discussion on. And then we heard from Greta. She then looked at participation. Very, very important issue of participation. How do we talk a lot about youth participation in this conference? What does it really mean? And Greta has tried to show us in the Mexican context what participation means for them. What does participation mean in your context? How would you measure this participation? How do you know if youth are participating more today than 5 years ago? And then finally we heard from Devon, which is now going a little further to look at the participation in respect to gender, and to say that young men are not equally participating in development. In fact, it's going against them, which is going against the trend that is public in other places. So some very different presentations but connected. But what does it mean? What did it mean for you? What reactions do these presentations have for you? I now open the floor for a few questions, make them very brief, so that we can have a response from the panelists as well. Any thoughts? Just shoot up your hands. I see your hand. Go ahead. Let's make them very quick so we can have some discussions. Much tighter comments as much as we can. Go ahead,
okay, it's sort of a comment, but invoking some thought. You placed up on the screen the Barbadian situation. And this is a conversation that I started yesterday with someone, where Barbados has a growing population. We have to worry about, instead of maybe schools, we have to worry about old people's homes. We have to deal with the problem of abandoned elderly being left in the accident and emergency hospital because of homes being overwhelmed taking care of them. We have to deal with the non-communicable diseases and the kind of health care that is geared towards the elderly. And hearing some of the presentations on youth, that had me a little concerned, because there's this push, for youth. Without I'm not saying that we should not look after youth. That's part of my portfolio. But I still have to be conscious that there's one play. And when it comes to allocation, what do I neglect the elderly for the youth? Do I neglect the youth for the elderly? And I heard a presentation talking about power. Power at whose expense? These are policy issues that I think that some of us need to temper our passion a little bit and face some realities. Because it is okay for you to champion government. You're not doing anything for young people. But yet you have other demographics who are demanding your attention, whose problem, if you are not able to strike the balance needed, could have some serious implications. And on the question of gender, we also, with that situation, I think I mentioned a little bit of it yesterday in another forum, where a lot of us, because of our youngsters, maybe our young males, maybe not wanting to go to university, we see them as being dropouts and so on. Then they are on a different track. And we are not listening and trying to create the road or pave the path for them to achieve what they want to achieve, and maybe earn 10 times the money of the university graduate. So we tend to put everybody in a little box because of our traditional perceptions of things. So I think that in all of what we are discussing here, we always have to be mindful that we need to strike a balance. And in terms of the Mexican example, I think this poses another question. Reading from the Barbados perspective, we have a lot of females who don't want to be involved in politics as members of the House. They don't mind working in the background and pushing the men, but they don't want to be upfront. And then we have a lot of young people who, when it comes to the political endeavors, they don't mind being the youth arms, doing the footwork, writing the youth manifesto, but they ain't ready to go and take on the headaches of being a minister. Although I hear that we should have a minister of youth that is a young person, but that person may not be ready and they don't want it at that particular point in time. So I think that sometimes our own feelings and how we see things may not necessarily line up with the reality of the situation, remembering that despite we are all Caribbean people, we are coming from different countries with different cultures.
Very good point. That's point one there. And I'll just take 2 or 3 more. So a very interesting point there that, you know, that youth development is a national issue. I said that yesterday. And it's very interesting that that point comes through. It's a national issue and countries must be allowed to define them. But I'll ask panelists to take note of those comments and at the end we'll take a, yes sir, from US staff. Could you just say, probably Madam PS, could you say your names that we know?
Oh, Ruth Blackman, Barbados, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry responsible for youth.
All right, thank you so much. Yes, sir. Could you also do the same?
The name is Shane Book. I'm a youth ambassador to the Vice Chancellor of the University.
Yes, sir.
My comment is more Jamaican based because I can't speak on the entire Caribbean. I believe that it's more a psychological thing when it comes to gender. Because what you find is that males are comfortable when females overshadow them. Because in the home, right, in the home, you are, hold on, no, you're actually comfortable with it. Because in the home, you are raised in a matrifocal home, right? Right? And most of the homes in Jamaica, the mother is the head. And because of that, you listen to your mother, you're okay with your mother making all decisions. And she's a female. You're not raised with your father where you can see your father taking that dominance for you to observe him and work that way when you go out in society. Right? So within the context of my country, I can say that many males, when you see them get up and they're able to rise above the occasion coming from a home where the mother is the head, it really shows that they are ambitious and they want better for themselves. And but in terms of gender, it is really the fact that they are comfortable with the female, which is why most persons go out in society and they see the females head of organizations. They're okay with it. They don't want to rise and take the position as well. If they run an election against a female, and they don't feel that level of confidence in themselves to battle the female, because they believe that because of where they're coming from, females have the better ideas, they are better decision makers, they are very good practical, and they are better in leadership than males, right? And it's becoming even more dominant now because you got the Prime Minister
So we're going to try and show you the point I want to make for this one is thank you so much for your comment, but what I think this conference is going to do, we have a lot of good ideas and hypotheses that need to be tested. And I want to challenge you to go and do some empirical research to back up, confirm or affirm what you have just said and bring that to the next conference. Very interesting idea, but what you have to do, we're trying to facilitate and stimulate ideas that need further research. I think that may be one of them that need some good research to make it valid. But thank you so much for sharing that. I take one more and I'm going to find some time to share.
Even though I just came in, I was looking at this.
Yes.
And as international relations in the department of government, I've been very interested in youth participation, particularly voting behavior and so on. I've looked at researches that in recent times, the trends and patterns is that shows that there is a high level of youth voter apathy. And even asking around campus, what is your attitude or your thoughts on this? Young people are very skeptical. I think, what are the possible ways in recent times can we re-engage them or make them more involved in the political and decision-making process?
Very good question. So one more and then we go to the panel. So we're asking, what does participation mean? And I heard that coming through in Mexico it might mean this. What does it mean in terms of voting? Let's hear our fourth comment and then we'll go to the panel. Yes. Say again, please. Sorry, did you say your name and did you say your name before?
No.
Please do.
Tina Renier.
Hi, Tina.
Yeah.
From UWI,
Yes.
Department of Government.
Yes.
My name is Zanella Saxton. I'm from the Federation of St. Kingston Nevis, and I'm the youth coordinator in Nevis. I was very intrigued by Dr. St. Bernard's presentation and the fact that he spoke a bit about low fertility and what that means for youth in the future and every other generation as we go along. And I thought, and he brought the point up towards the end of his presentation where he stated that this would mean that if you have that low fertility rate, the people who are actually reproducing, will be those who are on the lower end of the poverty scale. My question or my concern then becomes, what does that do for our social development, social services sector in terms of the economy of the countries? What would that do in terms of the dependence of the families on the countries to support them? I know he said that we have to put certain things in place to support them, but does that mean that there's going to be increased dependence? Yes. One may say we can have youth development programs when they get to the youth age, but what happens, what would need to be in place for us on that 0 to 1, 4 to 10, with preteen age, where we can make sure that they're alive before we can get them into those entrepreneurship programs or whatever it means or is needed for them to be empowered. So that would then suggest to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong or give me some guidance on that clarification, but that would suggest to me that means that the government would then have to pump more funds into making sure that those children can see through to youth before we can empower them to take care of themselves going forward. And that would then mean a great strain on the economy.
So some ideas coming through. I'm going to go to the plans. Let's make them short. I want to take one more round if you could squeeze them in. Ms. Mighty, could you check what's our time? Because we would have supposed to be finished now. Could you check what is the time that they're right now? So we'll know. So I'm going to go to the panel. We've heard some questions and some comments. What say you? We're going to start off with Greta. Let's see how we're going to start off and then we take.
Okay. Well, I have a couple of things that I wrote down, and I think that what Ruth has been saying is really important. And I think it combines a lot with what Godfrey said. We are very used, and this includes Mexico as well, to have reactive policy, right? Like, oh no, we have a lot of young people, oh, we need education. We needed education 20 years ago when those were children. Now what we need is to start thinking on what's going to happen. I mean, and in Mexico we're in big trouble because we have a very, very, very big generation of young people that by year 2050 are going to be old people with no retirement, with no nursing homes, with no health, with nothing. And right now, we're running late because we're talking about young people. We should be talking about the elder. I totally agree with you on that, and this is something that I usually say and that usually gets me into trouble because people are not looking at these things. So yes, we really need to be proactive about it, and we need to be planning ahead because otherwise we're just like trying to put up the fires that already started, and we're not looking at what's coming. And the second thing is, what happens with young people who don't want to participate? Well, let them not participate. I mean, there's no problem there. But at least in Mexico, there are a lot of young people who want to participate, but the system does not let them. For example, in political bodies, we have some political bodies have specific regulations that allow for young people. They have like a quota system. So they say that 20% of all candidates should be, younger than 30. But then when election times come, somehow we just forget about it, and we get all very, very old candidates, and young people are, like in the background, and they're like carrying stuff, and they're like giving away some flyers and stuff. And this is something that happens all the time. So we really, really, really need to make sure that young people who want to participate get the opportunity to participate because, and I agree with what Ruth said, a lot of them may not be prepared, but there are some of them who are super prepared and they are super willing and able to do the job, and they don't get the job because of their age, and that is not cool. And for Tina, I think that I agree with you. Young people are normally skeptical of the institutions, of participating through institutions. But what we found in our country is that a lot of young people are skeptical because they don't have access to information. they don't know what's going on inside the parties. They don't know what opportunities they might have in one or another institution. So what we did, and this is my organization's proposal, is that we created a website in which we portray all the different parties and what they're doing with respect to youth. So we have interviews, and we know that young people don't really like to read, so we created a series of videos where the party, like the young leader of every political party, talks to young people and tells them what's going on inside that party, so that young people can, if they feel like this connects to them, they can go and participate in the party. This is just a proposal. What you said is a very big problem, because we really need to get young people into politics, and I know they're not willing to.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask Devon. They've told us that we have 5 minutes. So I'm going to ask you to, yes.
Sorry.
So Devon, you want to share just briefly, and then you take it.
In terms of what Ruth said, in terms of women, some women rather sit on the sideline, you know, and because it all depends on everybody's desire is different, you know. It doesn't make sense to try to force someone into parliamentary politics if they are stronger in activism, you know. And then she made a comment regarding technical subjects, right? And males leaning towards technical subjects, but are seen as dropouts, you know. And I agree with that. Interestingly, in part of my research, I was led to go towards that direction, but for the purpose of the PowerPoint presentation, I didn't include it. But what you find, as I said in the presentation, is that in terms of the technical subjects, that is an area that males seems to dominate females in, right? And sometimes in the pursuit of technical areas might not lead directly to a university directly after high school, right? And so you find that some young men are not desirous of going to university directly or so. They rather go into the practice and learn it, and that is not a problem. The problem is that as a society we see it as males don't want to go to university, males don't want to do academic stuff. But because you have some males like myself who would like to go to university, who would be studious in terms of and meticulous in studies. But there are others who rather the practical side of it, and we have to accommodate that. And the last comment I would like to make is in terms of what Ocean said at the back regarding males feeling comfortable. That is a phenomenon that I can speak of in my own country, Dominica, right? It starts in the schools, right? You see that the young men, they would rather skip a class to loiter around the schools and go to see who are the girls in each classroom, right? They'll pass by, and the girls they love their attention, and they give them their attention, and they don't tell them that, you know, it's better you are at school, you are in your class instead of loitering. And so they develop that attitude, and then it goes beyond school, right? And also, what you are saying regarding the home, it is true. It happens in my country as well. But the thing about it is that okay? And that is where we have to, the answer to that is no, it is not okay. Because men cannot continue to be comfortable with women stamping over them. And the other thing is that in the presence of that, we still see that the UN goal doesn't address the male, right? While we still see that the women are rising, the policies are still geared towards empowerment of women and not necessarily men. And that is not the way. We have to understand that coming from a historical perspective, we cannot blame them for that, right? Because women have been oppressed. But now the times are changing, and we need to move to a point where we realize that we have to give equal attention to both male and female, because leaving one out of the equation only results in social ills. The same thing that happened with the women will happen with the men if we do not come to a point where we recognize that gender balance is an imperative.
Thank you so much for that. And then finally, Godfrey, some thoughts. based on the comments that were made.
Okay, I think in terms of my response, I will somewhat address the two main concerns, the one raised by Barbados and the one raised by St. Kitts neighbors. First of all, I think in terms of the presentation, I did end the presentation by making the point about the cross-generational and the fact that we have to be always cognizant of the cross-generational goals. What are the goals we set for youth? What are the goals we set for children? What are the goals we set for elderly? What are the goals we set for the working age population? We have to be cognizant of those goals. And we cannot really pursue youth development ignoring the goals for the other population groups. And I think that is the primary reason why in making the presentation I did flag the trends for children, the trends for youth, the trends for the elderly, the trends for the working age population, because we cannot seek to facilitate youth development without taking those trends into account. I also see the research as one where I am not providing a panacea for the world's problems or the Caribbean's problems, but I'm producing sufficient evidence which becomes knowledge for people to act on. You either accept it or reject it, but it is there for you to make and facilitate whatever decisions you have to make. And I think, it is a worthy sort of contribution insofar as we are so reactive in terms of how we treat with these kinds of issues. Now, the other concern I have with respect to the declining fertility, and albeit fertility is declining globally in countries, but there are some subpopulations that continue to have high levels of fertility. And those subpopulations are subpopulations that will produce offspring. In many instances, they may not be able to care and nurture those offspring in the way we may expect. And the state will have to step in. Now, insofar as I say this, I am treading on what I have been writing on in terms of, the whole question of development. I just don't see development as, building and advancing material well-being only. There's a spiritual dimension to it. There are issues of equality and equity. But if it is that we have to achieve all of these noble objectives, these noble goals, we have to put in place some form of capital accumulation. Capital accumulation, in the economic sense, they talk primarily about financial capital to generate wealth. But you have physical capital, you have social capital, you have human capital, you have natural capital. Natural capital are those aspects of that hardware, our natural resources and those kinds of things. We have to manage those things. And what I am saying is that in the context of youth development, we have to be able to think about, how we are going to incorporate emergent generations of youth. And as these youth go into adulthood and eventually go into old age, we have to have that vision of this moving target in terms of where it is heading with the changing realities. So we have to have that kind of sociological imagination to understand these changing realities, and not only the changing realities, but how future generations may actually perceive these changing realities. So I think all of this comes into the picture. And to sort of close off, in a Trinidad and Tobago context, I always tell people, in the period when I was born in Trinidad and Tobago, there were approximately 32,000 births every year. Today, it's down to about 16,000 births. And in about 10 years' time, it might be down to about 14,000 births. But a large chunk of that 14,000 births, it's not those mothers who in the universities and so on bearing those children. It's going to be those women who are on the margins and really struggling to make ends meet. And if you have to build social capital, if you have to build human capital, if you have to facilitate the mechanisms to keep that financial capital going, you have your work cut out, especially if you have to take care of that growing elderly population and provide all the needs for that growing elderly population, because it wouldn't come from anywhere else unless you're going to depend on people coming from abroad.
Very good. Thank you. So I just see one hand. I'm going to take it. Just make it very brief.
Just discussing it ourselves. Is it fertility or is it low birth rate?
Well, okay, I understand. I mean, fertility, there's a medical conception of fertility. But when I use fertility, I'm using fertility in a demographic sense, I mean low birth rate.
That's the definition. So, no, we're at the end of the time that we have been allowed. So just to say that I think the presentations were very insightful. And I think we had something to take away from this meeting. From Godfrey's presentation, I think we should take away the fact that we are often saying we don't have the data. But Godfrey has demonstrated that using population data, we can tell a story about what is happening in our countries. That's a start. And we can go as far back and reach even forward into the trends and to begin to pull what those may mean. So I want us to take that away as a point of information. I want us to also look at the trends that he has figured for these 6 countries. Maybe we can begin to look at what we need to do for the elderly. So the second point I want to take away from Godfrey's presentation and from the comment in the room is that we cannot be looking at youth in isolation in terms of population. We must also keep an eye on the other age cohorts, those coming, younger ones, and those who are the older ones. We must begin to look at that. That's a very important point to take away. In the interest of time, I want to then talk about Greta's presentation, which is a good example of, we talk about youth participation here in this meeting so much, but I don't hear the hard evidence of what's the participation, where is the participation happening and not happening. And what Greta was able to show from the Mexico experience is they could actually document where it is happening. What do we take away from this, therefore? And we need to go back and do some more work on youth participation in our own context. If it's going to be started at something very basic, at national boards, or parliaments, or at local government level, but pick some kind of indicator, or a few indicators, and begin to track what is the extent of youth participation. It can be done. That's what Mexico has shown us it can be done. And then I want to take away the context of the Caribbean. Gender is an issue. Are we paying enough attention to what's happening with the males in the region? I think what Devon has put on the table is something worth considering. What is happening to our young men and those in schools? Are we doing enough? I think these are some sobering thoughts to take away. I want to thank you for spending the last hour with us. I want to also thank you for your contribution and for the expressions on your face. I want to thank Ms. Mighty for keeping our time and our technicians for being here as well. And I want to say to you, please take these publications away and share them with some of the others who did not come. I have 2 announcements to make. The first one is that the Commonwealth produced a Youth Development Index, which I mentioned yesterday, which looks at the issue of data. And you could reference this. We will have another one coming out this year into next year, 2015, 2016. And Godfrey assisted us with this one as well. And we looked at the issue of participation, but we need to do more on this. So I encourage you to look at this. And we are also working with Barbados now to do a national YBI as a case study of how we could help other countries as well. So we're going to start that. Madam PS is giving us the go. We will begin that this month, and it will be a case study of how we could help other countries to do that. The final announcement is one the organizers have sent. For those who are interested in adolescent and youth-led advocacy, well, UNICEF, Respect Jamaica, and I think the US Embassy is calling for young people to apply to be a part of a youth-led advocacy network. You can see me right after this to see what information is here, but I think it's a wonderful opportunity for this conference to be able to have young people participating in decision-making at UNICEF, Respect Jamaica, and the USA Partnership Project. So thank you very much again, and I please hope that you'll enjoy. A round of applause again for our presenters. Devon, young men socialize this to when I have a wonderful English presentation, and of course Godfrey, the wonderful, very good scientific statistician, always giving us the data for us to go and consider. Thank you so much again for sharing this presentation.